So what I'm looking at today is a Look KG131 carbon fiber bike from the mid or early 90s with carbon fiber main tubes and rear triangle and aluminium fork. You can see the weaving in the main tubes, which is really cool actually, and even on the stays here, which is a feature of bikes I think of this era. Like they used to show off, this is a carbon fiber bike, here is the weaving, and in traditional sizing of tubes which are similar to steel tubes of the day. In its day it was a very good bike. I mean, very expensive I imagine. Could be a pro racing bike back in the early 90s. But these days it doesn't really compete with carbon fiber bikes because they're so light and stiff. Yeah, I'd like to revert it back to being a road bike rather than having this hybrid setup where it's got straight handlebars. I'd like to put on drop handlebars, new grip tape, Shimano 600 shifters, and have it back into a more of a performing road bike, and with a new saddle as well. Condition wise it's not bad. There's some marks on the top tube, and interestingly it's got names on the top tube as well. Obviously it was like a club racing machine. You know, it's lost some of its decals. It's a bit grubby in some areas, but basically it's in pretty good shape. I don't like the condition of this handlebar, and also I don't like these big chunky 8-speed Shimano levers either. So this is part of the reason I'd like to change it back as well. I also find it interesting, you know, how this bike straddles like two eras of bike history. You've got this sort of modern carbon fiber frame with this lugless sweeping head tube and cool like weaved carbon, vertical dropouts. But then, you know, it has also this same geometry and sort of similar sized tubing as a vintage bike. It's got a lug here at the bottom bracket, it's got a cluster, and so you've got sort of a mixture of two defining eras of bike history, and it's a sort of mixture of them both, and it shows you the changes that were happening in technology at the time. On this other side you can see it's in good condition. It's got this Team Crow on, which must have been part of a club team bike and raced in amateur competitions perhaps. It's got a lot of life left in it. It's got a Compagnolo front wheel with Ambrosio rim. They're both clincher rims. This is Dura Ace with the 8-speed freewheel on it. And yeah, it's not the lightest. Yeah, I imagine it weighs probably as much as a very light steel bike. And I see sometimes, I've read some comments about how this bike doesn't compare to, this frame doesn't compare to modern, very new carbon fiber frames, and there's a certain snobbery you get from people who say, my specialised, brand new specialised carbon fiber bike is way better, and this type of comment. Because they think it's all about weight, but it's not. I mean, unless you're riding huge distances or you're involved in some kind of like professional racing, I mean, what difference does it make really? Is incremental differences between this bike and a modern carbon fiber bike. Yes, it's not as stiff, it's not as light, but it still rides really well. It's still down to you in the end, how far and fast you want to go. And there's a snobbery involved that everything new, all new bikes are better than old ones. I don't believe that. Here are the items I'm going to replace. I've got a set of, just happen to have this set of 3T handlebars in storage. I have a pair of 8-speed Shimano 600 shifters from the early 90s, a set of platform pedals, the basic handlebar tape, which is... Well, there are always issues with bike repair, and here are a few I came up against. Here we have a 2mm Allen key screw to release on the edge. It will drop out if you go too far. And then one here as well. And this should come off. I think I've only ever taken one of these off before, a long time ago. So the brake cable goes in there, gear cable goes in here, which changes the number. But how do you get it out? Well, after taking this off, I realised there's nothing there. So I can only presume that you have to take this front section off with these two screws. Got a design flaw here by Shimano. These screws are really weak. See? They're just rounding. This one's alright. So the only thing I can do right now, this screw is completely stuck in there. The only thing I can do is pull this up because this one's out, bending the plastic. You can see the cable and you can just see it. I can try and get it out. There. In the end, that was really tricky to get out. You can see it sits in like its own casing there. But I imagine it can get stuck in there pretty easily, and then you just have to like dig it outwards, which was more difficult to do, seeing that this thing was not released properly because of that screw. But finally I got it out. Bad design, Shimano. Now if I just release this bolt here, the mechanism should just come off, slide off. Ugly. So now that's off. This helps me just slide it this way through the stem, which I'll release here. So this is 6mm. Doesn't feel like it's going in that well. Maybe slightly rounded. So you've got to think about the way it's going to come off. There. This thing can come out. There you go. Yes. And then I'll just put the new handlebar on this 3T stem. So I'm going to measure this central handlebar section, the sleeve, and this, I'm using this manually at the moment. Looks like it's 26mm, which should be the same as the 3T handlebar. What you have to remember when you're changing the handlebars is the original gear cable housing may not be long enough. See, I'm not sure that this is going to fit the levers when I put the levers on. I don't think it's long enough. I think it should be to about here. So I think these will need to be replaced. And here's what I got. I went to my local bike shop and bought this road shift cable set, which is Shimano made, but it's expensive. I mean, I could have got it for €10 on Amazon, I think, or 12, but I paid 18 at my local bike shop, which is pretty spendy. But this will give me the housing length I need to replace or to install these Shimano 600 shifters. A good clean cut. Add the caps on both ends, which will prevent the cable itself from shearing and being damaged when it goes inside. You have to make sure that the nipple of the derailleur cable sits right inside the shifter, so that when you're going to shift it, it's not going to move. So it's right in position. So the next problem is this rear brake cable isn't long enough to go into the shifter. It will wrap around this handlebar and should reach the shifter in there, but it's not long enough and I can't stretch it. So that'll need replacing, and it runs internally through the top tube to the rear. So I paid €18 for the Shimano gear cable and housing. This is really cheap. This is just €3 with its cable, two brake cables and housing. £3.95, so I've just gone cheap on this one. I always find that to help get this cable through to the rear hole, it really helps to push the lever beyond the handlebar, so you get a real good look at it. Otherwise, if you just do it to the handlebar, you often can't see the hole itself, but if you move the lever to the left or right and push it right back, then you can actually see the hole, and it makes it a lot easier to actually get the cable through. Take this out the back. The housing and the gear cables and brake cables are now installed. This is the electrical tape to fix it to the handlebar, and all the cables are threaded through down to the derailleurs and also to the rear caliper and front caliper. There's a bit of a tricky business doing this part, where you have to measure the housing so that it's not too short, it's not too long, and you have to thread everything through. But now it's done, I can put on the handlebar tape, and hopefully the bike will start really coming together. Well, it's the moment of truth for my Shimano 600 shifters. If you saw my last video, these were not working at all. They were completely useless. They couldn't shift, either of them, and were just really floppy. So I thought they were actually probably broken, but I decided to have a go at fixing them, and I just washed them and lubricated them and got them working again, and they seem to be clicking all right when I finally finished doing the whole cleaning process. So they click, but I'm not sure whether, you know, they actually work on the bike. So I'm going to check it now. Freewheel, there we go. That's working. The next one, yeah, just a bit there, coming back down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it jumped. Well, it seems to be working all right. Let me check the front shifter. That seems to work. Yeah, that's good news. Lots of grease. Tons of it on this side. You can see it. Wow. That's some of the most dirt I've ever seen on any jockey wheel. Crazy. So how do you determine whether a restoration is a success? Well, it depends on what your objectives are, and for me, I just wanted to make this bike a more of a racing bike, and put on drop handlebars and put on a new saddle and just make it look better. and for me it was a riding experience of having it in a more traditional racing bike style, and that's a success then. I mean, I wasn't planning on making it really expensive or putting on really high quality components. I just wanted to make it a better bike and, you know, capture something of that spirit of the time. Early 90s racing model of carbon fiber, which was pretty cool in the day. The grip tape is medium level, is about €20, but it doesn't really match the saddle as well as I wanted it to, but that's not a huge deal for me. I suppose a purist would say you want something really matching, and again a purist would say, well, the Mavic CXP30 rear wheel is not the same as this Ambrosio. This is Campagnolo front hub, Dura Ace rear, they should be replaced maybe, and also the Shimano 600 derailleurs are maybe not as nice as like a Mavic 800 series derailleur set. But then again, I don't want to spend 200 or 300 euro on very expensive vintage parts. But it cleaned up really well and I'm happy with it. It's a good riding bike, it's pretty light and it's nice to ride, and I think it looks better than it did, and that's the main thing for me, is to keep these bikes looking in really good condition.